So thank you so much for coming by on this beautiful November evening. Jen, the manager, always says that the space is the most beautiful when it's filled with people, and I think I share that sentiment right now. So, yeah, happy to have everyone here to celebrate this incredible author. So, first I will introduce his interviewer. Mr. Ethan Sandler is a writer-performer living in LA, whose likes include gardening and podcasts about basketball, and dislikes include people who are ambivalent to turn signals in writing bios. Ethan's current work includes an adaptation of The Weedle on the Needle, which, if by chance you know what that is, you're psyched, and a Duplass Brothers produced documentary series entitled A Regrettable Incident, which is daily kicking Ethan's buttocks. He is honored to be here. Please welcome Ethan. And the gentleman of the hour, Mr. Michael Wohl, tells stories. As an award-winning filmmaker, as an author of a dozen nonfiction books about filmmaking, and through curated culinary experiences that reveal the unifying magic of breaking bread, we are here tonight to celebrate in Herschel's wake. Please give it up for Michael Wohl.
Thank you all so much for coming. This is awesome. We thought that I would start with a little reading. This is, for people who haven't read the book, this is the prologue, which sort of sets up the whole story. Yeah, we can adjust that a little bit. Thank you. And then Ethan's got some questions, and we'll see how things go from there. In Herschel's wake. Prologue, 1984. It was unsettling to see my father in a suit. His beard was unusually kempt and trimmed, his bouncy Jufro, surprisingly tame and adorned with a white silk yarmulke, bobby-pinned a little off-center. He was wearing a loud, wide 1970s necktie, no longer remotely in style now that it was 1984. He opened his face into his big, dopey grin, his yellow smoker's teeth glowing in the dim light of the synagogue antechamber where I stood waiting by myself. "Hey, kiddo." "Look at you," I whispered, all dressed up. My freshly tightened braces caused my words to slur a bit. He nodded and gave an amused shrug as he looked around. "I feel like I'm in the other team's locker room." He wiggled his shoulders in an exaggerated shudder. We could hear the rabbi talking to the congregation on the other side of the curtain beside us. "You still have time to change your mind, you know. Joke God at the altar and keep your integrity." "You had a bar mitzvah," I shot back. "You survived." He rocked his head back and forth. "Perhaps." I am kind of nervous, I confessed. "I'll be glad when the reading is over." He put his hand on my shoulder. "Relax, have fun. Remember, religion, nothing more than a human construct. Plus, from here on out, you get to make your own rules." I smiled back at him, not really following. He continued, "That's at least a little consolation for, being a man now." He winked and then looked around to ensure we were alone, and he slipped a small, fat envelope into my hand. "And of course, this'll help too." I looked down and spread the top of the envelope open with my thumb and finger, and inside there were 3 chubby marijuana joints. They smelled glorious. "Happy birthday, buddy." I grinned, covering for the guilt of holding the contraband right there in the synagogue. He turned to leave. "Don't, just keep it from your sister." "Oh, of course," I said, playing it cool, tickled to share a secret with him, already trying on the posture of what I thought adulthood required. He nodded and headed back out, disappearing just as the cantor appeared, waving at me to step onto the stage. "Come on, it's time." I stuffed the envelope into my inside suit pocket, took a breath, and tried to... They're coming for me. I took a breath and tried to steady myself, but the grin kept fighting its way back to my face. The cantor led me through the curtain, and I stepped up to the bima, where an ornate Torah was splayed out. We had rehearsed all of this, but still I started to sweat. I thrust my hand into my pocket and made a fist. The rabbi laid his heavy hand on my shoulder. "Bar mitzvah is both blessing and obligation. I was overjoyed when young Michael came here to us, determined to find his own way, to mark his passage into adulthood with me and with all of you. I looked down at the audience and my friends, all sitting politely and patiently, at my 18-year-old sister Anais with her over-earnest, over-encouraging smile, and at my mom beside her in the front row, gritting her teeth with anxiety on my behalf, and probably focused most on how her rich, successful brother and his perfect family were judging our Ungapachka attempt to pretend we were normal. My mom was ambivalent about her Judaism. As a toddler during the Holocaust, safely growing up in Queens, she remained blissfully unaware of the horrors being committed, least of all her own family's connection to it. Her parents never spoke of their religion until at 13 she came upon her father crying after a meeting with a doctor who knew people from the old country. And only then was she forced to absorb the reality of why she had no relatives on her father's side. For me, Judaism was a part of my identity that I understood to be a bit unfortunate, like a cleft palate or being short. Something that made me different, but that I could compensate for with wit or mathematical acumen. I didn't know anything about bar mitzvahs until my friends started having these elaborate parties and getting showered with gifts and savings bonds. Best of all, a bar mitzvah was an excuse to invite all the girls from school to a party where I would be the center of attention. I wanted in. Dad slipped into the sanctuary through a side door and managed to trip over and knock down a stack of collapsed folding chairs lined up along the side aisle, creating a cascading eruption of noise and garnering the attention of everyone in the room. He flashed a smile and a quick wave to the congregation, and making no effort to clean up the mess, he scanned the seats for a place to sit. The rabbi continued, trying to overcome the distraction. And so it's quite fortuitous that today's passage is one about self-determination above all things, and about duty to oneself, to one's family, and to God. He nodded grandly at me, a cue for me to begin. But I just stood there frozen. He moved his hand from my shoulder to the small of my back and forcibly pulled me forward a step. "Begin whenever you're ready," he grunted. I watched my dad make his way to a seat in the third row, forcing a few of my classmates to get up to let him pass. He was smugly oblivious to my struggle to muster the courage to speak, to proceed with this thing, this commitment I had made, perhaps to spite him, though my teenage emotions were hardly coherent enough for me to consciously recognize that. And he finally sat down, of all places, right next to my Goy crush, Marianne O'Malley. I cleared my throat and began my memorized Hebrew. The rabbi stuffed a yod in my hand and then, with his hand on top of mine, roughly dragged the pointer along the hand-drawn glyphs on the scroll. As I spoke, he unconsciously mouthed the reading along with me, occasionally vocalizing that plosive sound that's so common in Hebrew. When I next looked up, my eyes went straight to that third pew 4 seats in, and I watched as my dad leaned over and whispered something into Marianne's ear, making her blush. She covered her face with her hand and she tried to stifle a laugh. I darted my eyes back down to the scroll and then closed them as I struggled through the last few stanzas. God, please make him die, I thought.
So
the book is about his death, if you're not.
Really makes me wish I read the whole book. This is such a gorgeous book you've written.
Thank you.
And I'm honored to be here to ask you some questions. I was confused reading the book while you asked me because I could not relate to any of it. Jewish father, bar mitzvah, and marijuana all are things that I don't relate to. I wanted to ask you first about the terrifyingly inevitable process of becoming her parents. And you thread that theme through on many levels throughout the book. Becoming your father in terms of seeing the trappings of writing, desk pads, desks, note cards that are in your life now. Also just how many people throughout the book say to you you're the spitting image of your father, you sound like your father. Moments when your father came out of your own mouth where you're like, holy shit, I sound like my father. Just striking the silhouette and actually stepping into becoming your father. So I'm just curious in your process, I think, mostly in living your life in this experience, of experiencing his loss, but also since writing the book, what your thoughts are now about the inevitability of becoming the person who vexes you the most.
You know, we are of our parents, whether we like it or not, right? Like every single cell in your body has their genetic code. And that is, you know, you can't run away from that. And yet, I mean, I spent, I think, much of my life, decades, trying to push him away, to deny him. And I think that resulted in a lot of, like, I don't like the phrase, but self-loathing, like this sense of like there's this part of me that I am attacking, that I am like this, you know, this autoimmune thing where I'm like trying to destroy this thing that is essentially part of my own identity, because I was so mad at him and trying to deny his presence in my life. And you know, one of the taglines that I've used for the book, which is I think, you know, a good theme, is like father, like son, like it or not. And in his death, I was finally able to sort of have some perspective on there's a separation, that he can be him and he can be dead and I still remain. And I really sort of came to this understanding that I had to forgive him. I had to embrace him. He had some pretty awful traits. Many of which are in the book, some of which didn't even make it in. You know, he had there were a lot of things about him that I found very difficult, but there were also plenty of good things and plenty of loving things and plenty of things that I'm proud of. And one of those is reverence for writing and reverence for art, and that's something that I hold so dear to me now.
Well, you quote him as saying to you in the book, you come from a long line of father haters. I hated my father, he hated his father, you hate your father, I don't blame you.
Yeah.
It's beautiful in that way to start from that place and then come to where you come. This is not your first book, but it is your first memoir.
Yes.
And it's beautifully a memoir about writing memoirs about a man who's writing a memoir about writing memoirs. Like it's this beautiful sort of like daisy chain of reaching for a story that's super elusive. In fact, your father's memoir is called The Kind of Life That Was Being Lived, which is the most like vague description of like the things I saw and thought, you know? And there's an incredible moment in the book where you wake up in what was his bed, his last bed. And you wake up in a sweat, and you don't know where you are, and then you slowly realize where you are, and then you realize that you're lying in the bed that your father had his last moments in. You describe that Kipling's Kim, his bedside table, a story about an orphan, and then you talk about this is where he was. He crawled on this floor. He vomited blood in that toilet, and it's the first time you step all the way into his experience. And then, as you describe it, it's the moment you pick up the pen. And I'm just curious about that relationship for you in terms of what drove you to tell this story, and how you wrestled, as he obviously did, with the nature of what is a true event in your life and what is an anecdote and what becomes a memoir, and like how that fog sets in for the necessity of what's funny and what's, you know. And lastly, sorry, it's a three-part question. And I may be asking it too early in this. I'm so curious what you think he would say about Herschel's Way, in Herschel's Way.
I'll start with the last one, because in the dedication I actually said, and you know, I dedicated the book to my siblings who went through this experience with me, to my children who I hope will someday read it when I'm dead, and to him. And my wife, I'm sorry, she's also dedicated for enduring my crazy.
Maybe a round of applause. Maybe a round of applause.
And then to my father, and I said, who probably would have hated it, and which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. My father-in-law, who's also here, was like, how could you say that? You wouldn't hate it. But it's not that he would have hated it. He would have been like, oh yeah, great. But he would have just disregarded it because he thought art required struggle. He believed deeply that the nature of art was struggle and was embracing your struggle. And if you're not suffering, it's not real. And his writing was, convoluted, passionate, but incoherent. He was obsessed with like Thomas Pynchon, with James Joyce, with like the people whose writing you have to read 15 times to absorb a paragraph. And I admire that stuff, but I'm like, I don't believe anybody's gonna be patient enough to read my story. I'm like, I gotta get it out quickly, make it easy to read, make it funny, But like his reaction, I think, would have been dismissive because it didn't hurt enough.
The metaphor is so loud to me that you have worked as an editor and think as an editor and designed software to make the act of editing more efficient. It's like you've built your life around being able to see the truest, most like cleanest, clearest version of like what. There's a lot of suffering in this book. It just happens to also be extremely readable and enjoyable. Sorry, I'm just defending you to your father. Anyway, okay, thank you for that answer. So
that was the third question.
Yes. So
what were the other ones?
Just memoirs.
I wrote the first draft of this book in 3 months while Sarah was pregnant with our first kid, and I wrote the first draft in a haze, in a fury. It was the easiest writing I've ever done. I've been writing most of my life in various ways, and this came out like this is the worst word to use as a metaphor, but like diarrhea. It was on its way out, whether I wanted it to be or not. I was like, no, it's coming out. And it was fun to write, unlike the other thing. I'd be in meetings at work, and I would literally have like a 5-minute break between something, and I could stop and open my file and just start typing the story, and then get interrupted, put it down, come back a half an hour later, and just pick it up right where I left off. And it was such a joy to write, but it was also, there was this urgency, obviously, that I felt. And part of it was I needed to get it done before the baby came out because I didn't know what was going to happen after that. It was also like I knew that before I was going to be a father, I had to somehow contain this feeling, all these feelings about my father, all this experience that I had about trying to find forgiveness for him. And with the help of a great editor, I found the actual forgiveness that I was pretending to put into the earlier draft. I knew I was supposed to forgive him, so I wrote the draft. I wrote the book, and it was like, here, I forgave him, and now I can be a father. And like 5 years later, I looked at it and I was like, oh, no, I actually have to forgive him. I actually have to have the emotional experience. And in writing the revision, I was able to break through and find the way and give the story a depth and a truth, I think, that was lacking. I think that my father, in all that convolutedness, his writing was all hiding the emotion, shielding the emotion to, make it art, make it deep, make it rich. You read it and it makes you scratch your head, and that's afraid of being raw and exposing the actual feeling. And so the idea about anecdote, I think, anecdotes are stories without the emotion attached. We use anecdote as a way for ourselves to tell stories and keep the emotion a little bit at bay. I tell the story of our first night moving into our house. This is last August, and our son had COVID and had a seizure in the middle of the night. On our first night in the house, we don't know what we're doing. It's a complete mess. The whole thing was chaotic. I've told that story so many times since that it's like an anecdote now. It's funny, it's light. Oh, we got to the ER, and there was this guy there, and he was bouncing around on one foot and hitting on the nurse, and it was, and that's good and healthy in a way.
Yeah.
But the point, I think, of art, of telling stories is to help the viewer, the reader, have the emotional experience with a little buffer so that they don't have to, so that their amygdala doesn't have to light up like, a candle, but that they are able to experience the emotion of the story underneath. I think that I've tried really hard to do that in this book in a way where it is, you get the emotional depth of it, but you don't have to actually go through the anguish.
Well, it's really, thank you for handling a 3-part question like that.
I have no idea if I even answered.
It's so beautiful to hear you talk about coming back to it, and then the actual forgiveness, the actual healing. That's my shot has been off this whole time. I have to start over. that the actual healing came in coming back to it and actually writing the book.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you about that healing. I hate this word, but I use it all the time, about closure. You, at the end of the book, say, I'm not angry, but I'm furious. And I'm curious for you what the difference is in your mind when you say you're no longer angry, but you remain furious.
The word furious may be not the perfect word. It's too late. It's already written.
I mean, everyone turned to 3D.
So where's the editor? Can I get my editor?
We're going to scratch out.
Yeah, exactly. Turn the page in your book. Cross this out. Disappointed, maybe? I think, anger is the passion, the immediate emotion. It's like climate versus the weather, right? The climate didn't change, but the weather changed. To forgive someone does not mean to dismiss or deny the harm that was done.
Yeah.
Right? And that was a big lesson for me, I think, that I could forgive him without dismissing the harm, right? And I think of I'm reminded, not to be too grandiose in this, but after genocide, I remember reading about the Rwandan genocide and about how the victims had to go back and live side by side with the perpetrators. And I was like, how could one do that? How could you? And it was not about forgiveness, but it was about there's no choice. You must go on. They had to rebuild the communities. They had to rebuild their lives. And it's unforgivable. That's the most extreme example of being unforgivable. But the only way to proceed with your own life is to let go of that, of the anger that you're holding on towards something. And, of course, anger and resentment and grudges only hurt the person holding them. The other person doesn't even know it's happening.
Yeah.
And so in this example, to go from that grand to the micro, he was never, I told him I was angry at him, but he never cared. He was busy focusing on his own shit. So I was the only one suffering from that. And I genuinely think I released that.
Well, it seems like the key to that in the book, and I think also maybe in your life, as we've chatted about earlier, is compassion. And there's a beautiful moment towards the end of the book I'd like to read, if that's okay, very quickly, where it's this incredible moment where you, for the first time, I think, displayed compassion. There's a memory of snorkeling with him, and you're young, and you see a seahorse, which, needless to say, male seahorses carry the babies, which is just a beautiful metaphor.
I never connected that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
That's hilarious.
I can say with some shame I have a seahorse tattoo on my back. I got it in college. I don't care. I don't care what you think. For this exact reason. I'm fine. We're all fine. You see the seahorse, you're trying to tell him, oh my God, I saw the seahorse. He's busy. So you're swimming, you're trying to find him. A few minutes later, I finally located Dad snorkeling on his own, 30 feet away. I swam over to him, buoyant, with adrenaline and newfound invincibility, but he was oblivious. Back on the beach, I tried to relay my story, but he was preoccupied, so I stopped. I remember the look on his face. It was the same look I saw when we were in Paris. It was a look that he wore often when I was young. And I never understood it at the time, but I knew enough that it meant to leave him alone. Now, in my memory, I recognize it. It was terror. As frightened as I may have been of the barracuda, he was enduring something much more existential. I'll never know what, but I'm beginning to understand that he carried it with him always. I just think that is so gorgeous. It's such a beautiful description of compassion, of finally taking some of that weight,
That was one of the very last things that went in the book. To speak to it took so many revisions and writing and realizing and to find that compassion.
Gorgeous. I have two more questions. The first is, there's a metaphor that you mentioned that you say, I know there's a metaphor in here, but I don't know what it is. He finally gets into his father's laptop, he can't figure out the password, and the password is, of course,
No password.
There's no password.
Just press enter.
And so
We've
it's
been
like,
trying for weeks or for days to like, how do we break in? We try every code, every combination. It's our birthdays. It's his astrological sign. It's it's the day he was whatever. Anyway, it was like press enter and it.
there's no password. So he says, like, I know there's a metaphor with a password and a password. I'm curious if you give it some thought to what is the password of no password?
My father was an enigma to me and my siblings. He was complicated, compelling, irresistible and dangerous, and harmful at times. And we were all pulled in by that and affected negatively by that. But it wasn't malicious. It wasn't. He was not. It wasn't calculated. He didn't know he was doing it. And to me, this is the connection, right? The no password is he was not building some elaborate trap. It was just stumbling along. It was just existence. I was really into the Tibetan Book of the Dead when I was in high school. Like, there's a way you can master death if you take enough acid, or you do whatever the things you have to do to get through. You can. My friend Harry, who had that experience with me, if we can uncover the key to death, then it will suddenly become okay. And here I was facing my father's death, and I was looking still for this. Oh, there's this thing that will make it all okay. There's this code, this secret master, one thing that will suddenly, and it wasn't true. Like, you have to go through it inch by inch. You have to dig through the dirt, scoop by scoop. You have to trudge through forgiveness, day by day, and you think you've got it, and then you haven't, and you got to go back, and there is no password. That's life. Like, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's not nihilistic. It's just simply banal. It's just what it is.
Well, this book is a really intimate journey with you through that exact process. I'm really grateful that you shared it with me. I'm excited for everybody to read it. It's just like lush and vulnerable. You really you tell your story in a way that is like feels true to the story. And so congratulations.
Thank you.
I have one more question, if it's okay. That shit is so delicious, that arugula you made. You sent me home with a box and it literally didn't make it to my refrigerator. I did not feel good. But you clearly, that's like you're doing something special in there. I know as someone who has a few hobbies myself where the Lord shows up. And I am curious if you could summarize what makes it good, Ramon.
I have been tweaking and honing the experience for like years.
I can taste that in my mouth.
Yeah.
I don't mean practically, I mean, what is it? What is it that makes that so delicious?
It's dedication. I mean, it's effort. It's the same, no password. It's one day after another. It's making them and being like, oh, this is going to be the one. I've been working on the peanut butter cup rugula for like months. The last like 6 months, I've made like 30 batches. This ones are pretty good. They're not 100%, but they're almost there.
Do you have thoughts on how to tweak it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm ready to go back in.
All right, great.
The problem is, go for it, Tara. Yeah, there you go. That's the right one.
Attack like seagulls right now.
No, I mean, like, the problem with that is it's never done, right? The problem with that, like, and this is something that this is with the book, with my other creative endeavors, like, you gotta just be done. You gotta let it go and move on, Things can't be that precious. The fact that they're so good is actually the benefit of the fact that I've been too chicken to start trying to sell them.
Beautiful.
Anyways.
Well, congratulations on finishing this program.
Thank you.